Hey, how you doing? Adam Corey here. Haven't seen you in a while. I heard you're a developer now. What's that all about? Okay, alright. Say hello to your mother for me. This video lesson is another JavaScript animation programming tutorial that looks to help wean coders away from requiring huge frameworks and big giant libraries to perform simple and slick little animations on a web page. Before we get our hands dirty in the coding part of the lesson, let's take a look at the finished product so you guys can evaluate whether or not this lesson would be worth your time. So when I click expand box 1 slides into view. Then when you retract box 1, it slides out of view. And really, we're manipulating the box's height property in CSS, but we're doing it through JavaScript over a time loop. And also we have box 2 here, which has a different height of content in it. So that lets you know that any height or any amount of content that will be in any of these boxes, it will expand it and retract it successfully. And you can also change the speeds, and I'm going to talk to you guys about how we can tweak this thing out, refine it, and all that stuff towards the end of the video. Okay, here's the start of our HTML document that we're going to script to. So if you would like to follow along, you just need to get to the same point that I am here. You can see I have the basics of an HTML5 document, and then here I'm going to open up the body content, and I'll explain it very quickly. H3 is just a heading on top. That was the big black bold kind of heading that we had on top. This first paragraph element, that's the element that holds the top two little links or control buttons or control mechanisms that will expand and retract box 1, or div 1 in this case. So right under that paragraph, here is box 1, and it has an ID of div 1, and it has a class of myDivs. And you can see this other div down here has the same class. So we just want to affect those divs, have the same background, the same CSS settings. That way we don't have to have a whole lot of CSS rules in our styling. But you could also just remove this class and have each one of your boxes individually styled within your CSS by targeting that unique div. So in our CSS up top here, you're going to see some code for this class myDivs. And just know that it affects both of the little sliding boxes on the page. Now in between the two boxes, there's another paragraph tag, and that one holds the expand box 2 and retract box 2 little links that control opening and closing box 2. You can see inside of each box there's just paragraph tags just to put default dummy content in there for you. So let's look at the styling up in the CSS. The first thing we do is target all the native paragraph tags on the page. Those are going to be the ones that hold our little control links or control buttons that make the divs open and close. And I wanted to give that a padding of 10 on the top and bottom edge, and then 20 on the left and right sides. And I wanted those to have a background of this color here. Those are these blue areas you see here that hold the two links. Those are styled by targeting the native paragraph tags in the page. Now those two divs that slide open and closed, if I click this, you see that div right there? That one slides open and closed. This area that you see here, this div, and actually this div as well, are styled with this rule here. Okay? So it has a background of blue, width 500 pixels, the height, set it to 0 if you want it to be not showing by default when the page loads, and then overflow hidden. And we use overflow hidden to make sure that the content within that div animates down nice and smooth with the div, and it doesn't just pop out and show. If you remove that overflow hidden from this little program, you'll see exactly what I mean. So you have to have overflow hidden on those divs. Now the last little thing is we target inside of those divs. There's little paragraph elements. Remember in the body, let's take a look. Inside of both of those divs, there's a bunch of little paragraphs I put in as dummy content, and that's what this rule is affecting. They have their own padding and their own background color. This background happens to match the div background color. That way it doesn't have a different color, but you can make it any color you want if you want it to have a background. So that's all the CSS. So I'm going to collapse the HTML and the CSS back the way it was when we started. And now we're just going to focus on the JavaScript because that's really what the lesson is all about. Okay, before we start with our JavaScript, let's reference something in the HTML here. You'll see that each one of these links When they are clicked, they just return false. That way the pound sign does not show up in the user's address bar. But in the on mouse down event, I put our little functions to fire off. And our little functions are called expand, when you want the box to expand. And then retract is the function that you run on the element when you want the box to retract back up. Okay? And you can see that each one of the box's control links are calling those functions expand and retract. And they are sending as an argument that particular ID that you want to affect. That's what you send as an argument through these functions. And you can really call these functions anytime you want throughout your HTML and your JavaScript. We just happen to be calling them through an on mouse down event here. But it could be any kind of event that you want on any elements that you want. Okay, let's collapse the body content once again. And we can focus on the JavaScript now that you guys are fully aware that there's HTML elements that when they're clicked or when they're moused down, they're going to call these functions to run. So the first thing we do in the JavaScript is type in function. And the first one was expand. We open and close parentheses. Open your little curly brace and go down a couple of lines and put in the closing curly brace. And there's your expand function nest. And anything that you put within that function nest, that code will execute when the little link is clicked on mouse down. And remember, we're taking in one argument, so let's just call that element. You can call that poo-poo if you want, but I'm going to refer to it as element. And remember, those are the IDs that are coming through dynamically. So element represents whichever div is being called to expansion. Now we're also going to have a similar function, and they're going to work as a pair together. And it's going to be called retract. So you can just copy that whole first one that you wrote, and then put the second one in like that. And just change the name of the function. And they're going to be geared a little bit differently. And at the end of this video, real quick, I'm going to show you guys how to externalize these two functions. That way you can use them on many pages of your website. You can universally use these two little lean functions that we're going to write to slide things up and down all over your website. And you can have one external file that you call. This way you don't have to have this script actually sitting in the documents that might want to use it. Maybe you have 4 web pages that might want to use this kind of animation. You want to externalize it at that point. So that's what I'm going to show you how to do. Okay, the first line in our expand function, what we're going to do is create a new variable named target. And that's equal to document.getElementById. And we're referencing this element dynamic div coming through the function. It could be div1 or it could be div2. Both of them are going to pass through this same function. Depends on what people are clicking. So target is really an object that just refers to whichever dynamic div is being sent through that function. Now this next line, we're going to use the offset height property on the target object to make ourselves another little variable that represents the height of the div. And remember, in our style, we have a height of 0 pixels set for our div because we don't want them showing by default. We want them to be all the way collapsed. And that's why we set in the CSS height of 0 pixels. So what we're doing here in the JavaScript is we're simply getting that value because that value is going to be changing throughout this expand function. This expand function is actually going to be a timed loop function. So h is going to be the value that we're going to be changing over time to create the animated effect. So really all this variable is doing is evaluating on the page what height the div is at that very millisecond throughout the animation. Now in the very next line, we're going to create a new variable called sh. It's short for scroll height, and that's going to represent the scroll height of the content within your target element. Scroll height is basically, that's a way to get the number of the height of the content that's within those divs. Remember all those dummy paragraphs I had in there? Really, scroll height represents the height of all of those. And we're adding that line so that your divs could have as much content vertically as you want in them. Your box can have as much dynamic content as you want in it, and this function will still operate correctly no matter the height of all the content that's within your divs. Okay, now the very next line after that, we're going to create our loop timer mechanism, which is the setTimeout method in JavaScript. And that gets 2 arguments. The first argument is the function that you want to keep firing off, and the second argument is the speed factor. It's really milliseconds. So if you set this on 1000, it would be every second you'll have a little animation take place. or a part of your animation take place very slowly. But I put it on 8, so it goes very fast. So the higher this number is, if it's on 5,000, it's going to go slower. Your animation will go slower than it would at 1,000. I'm going to put it on 8 because that's the fluidity I want. I want it to look smooth like butter. We want to fire off expand, the function that the loop timer is actually within. So this function just loops on itself by this set timeout mechanism being within it. And we're able to pass dynamic variables through that function. And maybe towards the end of the video, I'll show you how to make this number 8, the speed at which things will expand. I'll show you how to make that dynamic, as well as this first argument of the element being dynamic. If you pass that dynamic variable through the top, you can add as many arguments as you want to this. So here you could put poop, and poop could represent the speed. And you would just keep sending poop like that, straight through. And really, to complete this working, all you'd have to do is go down here into your HTML and actually send the speed. So you put a comma and then the number that you want for your speed. I had it on 8, so you can send that 8 right there. You can make it 20. That way you can change the speed dynamically when the function is called on mouse down. So does that make sense? You can send more than one dynamic variable through these expand and retract functions. But I'm going to press Ctrl Z and get back to where I had hard-coded speed in there. There we go. But now you see that you can have this dynamic as well as the argument that's being passed through the expand function. Okay, so how much JavaScript do we have invested so far? 4 little lines. That's not bad. All we have to do is 2 more things. There's not much code involved at all. All you have to do is understand the concept of the timed loop. Then you can animate. Alright, so under our loop timer, all we need is an if-else condition statement. And then right under that, in the last line of the function, we're going to adjust the target element, which would be div1 or div2, whichever one is being called to pass through this function. We're affecting its style height property, and we're changing that to the dynamic h variable. And the dynamic h variable is changed within this if and else condition statement, which I'm going to explain right now. And then that's the last little bit of the expand function. You see, you're looking at all of the code that goes into the expand function right now. We're not going to put anything else in here for now. And it operates really nice. Alright, so I've explained all of these lines except this if-else condition statement. So what that's saying is if this height variable, which is the dynamic height of the box as it's growing through the animation, that's what this h variable represents. So if h is less than the scroll height, which, remember, I explained what the scroll height is already. It's the content within that box. So in essence, we can translate this into understandable English by saying if the height of my div is less than the scroll height of the content within it, then I'm going to make my div grow. Else, that means the height of my div is bigger than the scroll content within it. We run this code and really stop the timer and everything because your height of your div would be greater than the content within it. And really, you just want to stop the expansion process when the height of your div is bigger than the content that's within it. And you have to remember that this function expand is running extremely fast through its looping process. And the height of the box is growing the whole time throughout your animation. So this h is changing. So if throughout the whole process of the animation the div is less than the content within it, then you're going to take the target offset number and add, compound 5, a value of 5 to it. And you can change this value and this value. They'll both affect your speed. This is how many pixels that through each pass of the loop that the box is going to grow. So just remember, as this expand function loop is processing, if the height of the box is less than the content within it, then you definitely want to keep animating it, making it bigger. Now if the height of the box ever becomes bigger than the content within it, then this else comes into play. And what happens there is you clear timeout, you stop this super speedy little function from processing, and then you can just run an alert to yourself that says expansion complete. And this wasn't in the little demo. The alert wasn't in the little demo at the beginning of the video. I added that in just for developer purposes. You don't have to have that alert there. You can comment that out. But I would suggest that you have it there just while you develop so you can clearly see what's happening when this else condition comes into play. That's really when this else condition comes into play, that's the end of your animation. And then, like I said before, you simply affect the height, the CSS height, which is this property here that we set in the CSS initially when the page loads. So you're using that dynamically changing and growing H number to apply to the pixel value of the height of that box. That way it's constantly changing in size. And really, that's really the logic behind JavaScript animation programming, is that you have a timed loop and you have to adjust some values of something. Maybe it's left position or its top position on the page. You can animate the width, so it doesn't even have to be the height of the box. You can animate the width so it grows horizontally. But here is where you're really applying the animation, because you're changing the height value of that box very quickly through a timed loop. So if we press Control S and we run this in the browser, we should see an expansion, and then it says expansion complete right when it gets done with that animation. Now let's hit box 2. Alright, we get an expansion. It says expansion complete. See how that looks again. Now let's mess with these values. If I make this a 2, let's run that, and you'll see how much faster it is. You see? It goes really quickly. And if I make this a 1, that means it's only going to grow 1 pixel each time through the loop. So what that's going to do is kind of slow it down. You see? If I put this on 10 pixels that it's going to grow each time through the loop, it'll really speed up. I'm thinking a good speed is for this box to grow 5 pixels each pass through the loop, and this to be set at 8 or 8, 10, something like that. Seems to make a pretty smooth animation. But something around these numbers, you know what I mean? Now, to keep things really easy, let's just take all that code that we placed inside of the function expand. Press Control C after we highlight it. Let's go down here into function retract and paste it. And let's start at the top here. This line is going to remain exactly the same. This line is going to remain exactly the same. This scroll height is not needed. This variable is not needed because our objective in the retract function is to reach back to 0. So really it doesn't matter what the scroll height is in this particular function. Now the loop timer can stay exactly the way it is, but you have to just make sure that you change the name of the function. So copy it there and change it here, because you want retract to be looping on itself. Now remember when I said we want to reach down back to 0 to retract? So we're just going to put a 0 here, and we're going to change this operator from less than to greater than. So if the height of our box, as the animation is taking place, the height of our box is greater than 0, then we definitely want the animation to keep taking place. So we increment. Actually, we're going to decrement. This has to be minus equals 5. We're going to take away 5 pixels from the height of that div each pass of the loop, if and only if it's not 0 yet. Now if it happens to get down to 0, that's the end of your animation. That's when the else condition fires off, and you can force the target.style.height property for the element to be 0 pixels. So that's what I would do. I would just force it to be 0 pixels right here, just in case it's anywhere in between 1, 2, 3, or 5. Just force it down to 0, which it really should be anyway by the end of the animation. So this line probably isn't even needed. And then you want to clear timeout again, and then instead of saying to yourself expansion, you say retraction is complete. And like I said, these alerts, they're not necessary. You can comment them out and remove them, whatever you want. But that way, what you'll have now, let's see if this works correctly. I'm going to run this in Google Chrome. Actually, let me go ahead and run it in Internet Explorer, because those are the two that really we should evaluate in. Allow block content. So here we are in Internet Explorer. Let's expand box 1. When it gets to the end, it says expansion complete. So the animation is over, we know it, and our loop has stopped processing completely. Now let's retract that box. Retraction complete. The box is gone. Now let's try it in Chrome, make sure everything is cool. Yep. Okay. Let's do box 2 and retract box 2. Okay, so there's Internet Explorer in Chrome, and it works in Firefox as well. Don't worry about that. and all the other popular modern browsers. And you can actually have that retract box link within the box as it comes down. Have it here on the bottom or up here on the top of something. This little link that says retract box. It doesn't have to be here up next to the expand box link. You know what I'm saying? So you want to retract it, expand it. That way it'll make a little more sense with toggling. Now you can also make this say toggle box 1 and toggle box 2 and remove those other two links, and just clicking this one will make the box go up and down respectively depending on what position it's in. And you would have to reprogram this to act that way. So what you're looking at here is a very slim, just really the beginning of a really cool animation pair of functions. So you have your retract and you have your expand, and they work as a pair together. So what we're going to do is take that pair and make them universally dynamic. So all 10 or 20 or 50, 500 pages on our website can call those same two functions from one place, and we don't have to have those same two functions on all 50 pages. Now watch how easy it is to externalize this, make it modular and really useful for all the pages on your website. You just press Control X to the things within that script tag, and then just make the script closing part of the script tag on the same line as the opening part. And then here you're going to put the source attribute. And that's going to be equal to whatever name that we want to give the JavaScript that we're going to make right now. I'll call it expand underscore retract.js. Then all you do is press Control S and you save your file. Then you go to File, New, and create a JavaScript file. If you're in Dreamweaver, you can just do the method that I did, File, New, JavaScript. If you're in another editor, you know how that editor works, so you do it the way you know how. So all I'm going to do is press Control V and pop in the code that I had within my clipboard. And there's my two functions. Press Control S and save that as expand underscore retract. And you just make sure that you have it in the same folder if you're going to refer to it like I am here. So I just save that into the same folder. If you want to have yours in a JS folder, you just put JS / and then refer to that file. But since mine is in the same directory, I'm just going to refer to it like that. Press Control S, make sure both of those files are saved, and now let's preview this in the browser. If it works, then we know we have successful modularity. Okay, so like I said, you can use this to integrate this expand retract.js script into any web page that you want. So that way you have this code here, you only wrote it one time, but it'll work on 1,000,000 pages. Alright, so this code and this code, both of these files, the code for them is going to be available underneath the video at Develop PHP, and I will surely put a link to it in the video's description at YouTube there. Alright, I'll talk to you guys later. Bye bye.